Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello and welcome back to For Your Consideration, the podcast featuring roundtable discussions re-evaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm Mike Josick.
And I'm Dustin Friesenham.
Thanks for joining us. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about the 1975 Fish in the Water movie.
As opposed to Fish Out of Water?
Jaws.
AKA that movie that made you more afraid of sharks than cows, which, according to the numbers, are the real killers.
What are the stats on the cows? They kill
20 people a year on average compared to one killed a year by sharks. So yeah, 20 times more dangerous than sharks, people.
Alright, so we only have one below-the-line item to talk about before we get into the episode. We received a review and a comment on iTunes from Mike the Man. He says, "This is a great podcast on all things movies. Subscribe if you're looking for something fresh and new to listen to and all the loud noise known as the movie podcast scene." Thanks very much, Mike the Man. That's a great review. Really appreciate that.
No, thanks very much, Mike. Like, that really does help out. Certainly wasn't expecting something that nice the first time around, too.
I was surprised that we got a 5-star rating right off the cuff, though. That was pretty awesome. I guess the only other news is that we're now watching and recording in the brand new palatial For Your Consideration studios.
That's right. I bought a new house solely for this purpose, not so that I could move out of a tiny apartment, and it
just makes sense.
It just makes sense.
The podcast needed some breathing room.
I was feeling too crammed in to that bedroom. Now I can stretch out.
Alright, so moving away from the below-the-line stuff, let's get into the film credits. So Jaws was directed by Steven Spielberg, produced by Richard D. Zanuck and David Brown. Screenplay was by Peter Benchley and Carl Gottlieb, and it was based on Jaws, the book, by Peter Benchley, starring Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Lorraine Gary, and Murray Hamilton. Music was, of course, by John Williams, cinematography by Bill Butler, edited by Verna Fields, distributed by Universal Pictures. It was released on June 20th, 1975, and is essentially considered the first great summer blockbuster, the originator of the summer blockbuster. Made for $9 million, grossed $470 million, as well as countless sequels and stuff.
Merchandising, hats, shirts, like the one that Mike is wearing right now. Not that you can tell.
The film sits in the 56th position on AFI's Top 100 list.
And it also sits at 75 on Sight and Sound's Top 100 Director's Choices for movies. Somehow this ties with Salò or 120 Days in Sodom. I call bullshit. We might get to that later if I can convince Mike to sit through that.
Well, it is technically on one of the lists that we're kind of adhering to, so I'll probably have to watch it.
It's one of those ones that I would not recommend to anyone, but that is not the one we're doing today. We're doing a good movie today.
We're doing Jaws. And Dustin, traditionally, you take the first crack at it, so what did you think of Jaws?
Especially when it comes to these very famous movies that have been around for 30-odd years that I have not seen until this very day, I was really off in my expectations. It was longer than I thought it would be. I was expecting sort of what you'd expect from your cheesy horror movie. But no, they built up a lot of tension throughout the movie, even if it was unintentional, because I know that they were having all sorts of animatronic shark problems. That worked for it. That worked for it big time. And it's always hilarious to see that in these huge famous movies, these problems that end up being things that save it. Silent Hill, the game, they couldn't preload everything, so they had the fog, and that became iconic.
It was a rendering issue.
Exactly. Jaws, they couldn't get the animatronic shark to work very well, so it was barely there, which kept up the tension. If you had it there every 2 seconds, it doesn't work. You look at a lot of horror movies, and you don't want the monster to be there all the time. It ruins it. And here, it really helped. And actually, I enjoyed the last hour where they're all just screwing around on the boat, and they're sort of slow-rolling the whole hunt. And I thought it felt very real, and that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about it.
I find it hard to say anything bad about this movie. When we decided to watch it, I was just kind of like, perfect movie. I can take a nap while we're watching, because I've seen this movie I don't know how many times. I think I will still actually stand by what I've often said, which is this is Spielberg's best movie. I think it is the best display of his talent. I think it is the best display of his storytelling. I think Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw, they should have had a special category where everybody could win Oscars. I think the script was great. Before we watched it, or as we started watching it, I told you, Dustin, to watch for how in the first half of the movie, kind of like how Robert Altman would have people talk over each other. Like, there's always noise going on. There's always activity. There's always some kind of conversation.
Minus the somber part with the grieving mother. There, everyone got quiet. When it was supposed to be lively, it was lively. And then when stuff was somber, it was somber. It really helped sort of accentuate those moments for sure.
But they introduced you to the characters not through exposition, but through showing you the characters operating in their daily lives in the town. You sort of picked up on certain roles. I never actually picked up on it until this viewing, which is funny because I've seen this movie I don't know how many times. But when Quint gets introduced, he has that classic fingernails on the chalkboard, and then he kind of gives his spiel. And it isn't until the mayor says, "Thank you, Mr. Quint," that character's name is given to us, the audience. Whereas in a lot of movies, that would be the first thing that you heard.
We should go talk to Quint about this, because we know that guy.
And everything was just kind of delivered to the audience in a very organic, very sort of natural way. And I really appreciate that about this movie. And it makes me happy every time I sit down to watch it. That's something I look forward to.
There were very few things to really gripe about with this movie. The only odd thing that I'd really pick at it a bit for is the mayor is way too sort of villainous with this. Yes, I understand that your town's livelihood is based on the economy, which is the summer and all that, but you don't have to be quite such a dink about it. I mean, if this year goes badly, okay, that's one thing. But if sharks keep killing people, that's going to ruin your town's economy for years to come. One bad year versus 10 bad years, he is not thinking ahead. He is very, very stuck in the moment, and it's...
But I think he's a coward. I think he's...
totally a coward, especially when he's backpedaling later.
And I mean, it's politics, right? He's trying to keep the people happy. He's trying to make Brody the bad guy. He's trying to kind of cover his ass, but really, Brody and Hooper, they can't bring him any evidence. I mean, there is a body, and there is like an expert who is saying, this is a shark attack.
And then he drops the tooth like an idiot.
Hooper drops the tooth.
Which I totally saw coming. It's like, yep, that's not flying. We need a couple more deaths here.
So, like, I think it's legit for you to say that, you know, maybe the mayor was a little too arch, but I do think that in the context of the story, they did create a situation where...
It is still believable enough.
It's believable within the context of the film, yeah.
But the one thing that I will argue to the death is that when he sends his son to go play in that little, in the pond, and his son complains, "Oh, I don't want to go to the pond." First off, you know that there's a shark there, and you've been doing enough research on sharks to know that they're probably not entirely safe in that pond anyway. All right, fine. But then they have the whole swarm of boats out there. They have the scare. Then they hear somebody shouting about there's a shark over in that little inlet. Nobody tells all those boats. The boats apparently decide to just sit there while the entire crowd runs over to the pier or runs over to that inlet. And the boats are just like, everybody's leaving. I guess let's just stay here. Let's go home. I don't know. That would be my one and only gripe that I can really pick on.
When you're talking about the boats, are you talking about the shark watcher guys?
Yeah, I'm talking about the shark watcher guys, of which there was dozens of them. They had the entire place completely surrounded, and then they were all gone when everybody went to the inlet, which was apparently like 15 seconds away to run. I mean, the kids carried a goddamn boat there. And the boats couldn't make it around in time to be seen after everything happened as people were looking out. It's not like they showed up late. They didn't bother at all. They're like, well, we caught the pranksters. Our job here is done.
I will concede to you that there may be a problem with geography, but I respectfully ignore your complaint.
It is fairly minor. I'm just trying to put a smudge on your perfect movie review, because I had to do that to my perfect movie when I saw it just about a month ago, and I saw the little problems and I have the little gripes with it. It's still a great movie though.
Dustin's talking about The Thing. We were having a discussion earlier today about
John Carpenter's The Thing, not the remake, which is a remake of the original that John Carpenter's The Thing is a sequel of.
Well, the new Thing is more of a requel because it's a remake and a prequel at the same time. But anyways, we're talking about... Dustin was saying that, like, he now is watching movies with a slightly more critical eye because of doing the podcast, and it kind of punched a couple holes in The Thing, which he felt was a perfect movie. The last time I saw The Thing, I still think it's a perfect movie. I think maybe Dustin was just having a bad day.
I think I was having a good day because I was watching The Thing first off, and I was introducing it to somebody new who had not seen it before, which is always fun.
But I still think The Thing's a perfect movie.
I think we're going to have to get to that movie at some point. I'm going to have to check to see if I can find a list that it's on.
But there are a few what I think are genuinely perfect movies, and I mean, just off the top of my head, I think Jaws is a perfect movie. I think Raiders is a perfect movie. And I disagree with Dustin. I think The Thing is a perfect movie. I'm sure if I gave it some thought... Casablanca. I think Casablanca is a perfect movie. We covered that one in episode 4. They're out there. They exist. And I think it has more to do with the mood that you might have been in at the time, or...
Certainly not. Like, nothing is ever, 100% perfect. Nothing really can be. You can always find a gripe with something, and yes, that would probably be mood dependent. Where, at this point, I'm feeling like this isn't perfect enough. And which is why nothing can really be perfect, but yes.
I think we're doing The Thing next time, man.
I've heard a lot of stuff about this series, and certainly a lot of jokes about it. Like your Jaws, all these sharks chasing this family down everywhere all over the place, cracked articles about how kind of ridiculous that is. But one thing that the first movie definitely did very well was the animatronic shark. Even though it gave them such problems, it actually looked very good, especially in the water. When it jumped out, it could look a little ridiculous at times. But in the water, it was fantastic. Like for the 70s, no, this is great. This is way better than a lot of CGI that I'd see, like a Deep Blue Sea.
There are people out there who will defend Deep Blue Sea to the death.
I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just saying that,
Agreed.
In
no,
75, this animatronic shark beats out Deep Blue Sea's shark.
I agree.
As long as it stays in the water. Which, once again, getting all these underwater shots is so very difficult.
I really appreciated... I've seen movies where they'll have the stunt shark, and then they just generally use a lot of stock footage of sharks swimming around just so that you have sort of a lifelike looking creature. They did that, I think, twice.
I know that they did because they advertised it at the end that all stock footage was got from here. I don't know which was which.
Well, they did have a couple of people who were divers. It was a husband and wife team. I can't remember their names right now. And they did shoot real live sharks. And they used some of that footage. And there was a scene where Quint shoots the shark in the chin. And you see a shark underwater, and I think that's a real shark. That might have been the animatronic shark. That might have been Bruce. I don't know. The shark's name was Bruce. It was named after Spielberg's lawyer. And the other scene where they used real sharks was when Hooper's cage was being attacked. Once Hooper gets out of the cage, there's footage of a real shark tearing apart a shark cage, and that was real footage of real sharks, or a real shark, sorry. But I think the way that they used it was done in such a way where you didn't necessarily feel it cut away the way they use Jaws 3, for example. They cut away to stock footage of sharks, and you can just so tell that they've cut away to a stock.
Wow, the water is a different color. It's daytime, now it's nighttime.
Well, Jaws is also supposed to, the shark is supposed to be an unreasonably large shark, and then you cut to footage of just...
Here's a tiny little mako shark.
Here's a regular shark. I mean, they're still shooting great white sharks, but they're not the same scale, and you can tell. So it takes you out of the moment. And that's a perfect cue, if I ever heard one, to take a moment out of the episode and talk about how you can support the show. If you enjoy hearing Dustin and I talking about movies and you get your episodes off of iTunes, be sure to rate and review us while you're there. It's easy to do, it takes almost no time, and it really helps us out. So if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. And now, back to Jaws. I never felt... When I watch Jaws, I am completely immersed. No pun intended. From beginning to end, I want to hear every line. I want to see every scene, every music cue.
I am going to say, when we get to Quinn's boat the second time, I kind of want him to shut up really quickly. He just loves the sound of his voice at that point. But then later on, he becomes a whole hell of a lot more endearing. When he's trying to teach the chief how to do that one knot, I thought that was pretty adorable. It's yeah, you're a bit of a douchebag, but you're here actually trying to help. You're here being a decent human being, trying to get along with these people. And then they start trading their scar stories, and then he starts endearing himself to Hooper because, hey, this guy's got shark bites, I got shark bites, let's drink to that.
I love how they take their time with this movie. There's so much in cinema and storytelling in cinema these days where everything is just rushed. It's like, get them to the island, show me the dinosaurs, blow up the galaxy, like whatever it is. People need it right now. And I love the fact that you have that moment where they're just sitting there on the boat telling stories, showing scars.
You learn to care about these characters and think of them as people. Like, this is essentially a slasher movie to an extent. And normally in a slasher movie, it's like, all right, you pick the survivor and then the other people are just waiting for them to die. Here, that is not the case. You're wondering what's happening and you actually give a damn. Or at least I gave a damn. Even when Quint died at the end there, you saw it coming, but you're kind of hoping.
That was definitely the trajectory that Quint was on. I mean, you kind of knew it was that whole
He was all Ahab, yeah. I believe I shouted that out at some point.
It's not a subtle parallel. I mentioned the music briefly. One thing that I didn't really think about or notice prior to watching it tonight with you was I'm very big on saying, oh yeah, there's all the talking and there's all the towny stuff and there's all the movement and there's always something in the background. There's not a lot of music in the first half of the movie. The sound design of this movie, I think, is amazing, and they really let the town and the characters and everybody kind of breathe in that first half. The real orchestral stuff, there's tiny little, like, they have to play the notes when the shark comes into the scene. There's a few moments like Brody with, I think it's Michael, doing the kid is mimicking Brody's movements and stuff. That was
adorable.
And there's like the really gentle piano music and stuff. So like there's hints, there's little cues that come in there. But you don't really get like the full-on John Williams until they're out to sea on the Orca.
Though there were a couple scenes where the music it really didn't fit for me. And the only thing that took me out of the movie really was I know there was one, I think it was Hooper and the Chief there on the boat, and it sounded almost like it was supposed to be a sci-fi and they were discovering a new planet or something like that. The soundtrack was just way out of genre and it felt very off to me.
I actually felt it fit because at that point, this was an adventure movie. This was, we're hunting the shark. I mean, this movie kind of gets categorized as a horror, and I think part of that was just because
the whole scare thing that happened afterwards.
And I've never seen this movie as a horror. I've always seen this movie as
action adventure.
It's a little more action adventure. I mean, there's the whole story of Brody kind of having to overcome his fears.
I like that they acknowledge it at the very end, that he's like, man, why was I even ever scared of water?
And Quint has his sort of Ahab thing going. Everyone's, it's all, I can't really pinpoint what I would classify the movie as, but...
And that's the problem with classifications. A lot of time you're trying to shoehorn something into something.
Don't put Jaws in the ghetto. Nobody puts Brody in the corner.
And by doing that, you're putting a whole lot of characteristics, a whole lot of assumptions right on that movie. Like when I came in, I had the assumption that it was a horror because that's always how these movies were sold to me. So I was expecting something entirely different. Luckily, what I was expecting was worse, so I got a better experience out of it.
It is kind of half-half, because that first half of the movie where the shark is killing people, I mean, that is essentially a predator-prey kind of horror movie scenario. Don't go in the water. That's what they sort of sold the movie on. But as time has gone on and as I've sort of lived with this movie and gone back to this movie, it's that second half that I sort of dwell on, because
the second half is fantastic.
It's so character-based, it's so well-paced, it's so...
They start off as hunting and then it becomes survival near the end because everything starts failing.
And it does go back and forth. And I think, and this is bringing it all back to the music, this is where I think that the music actually really works and why I think it's more of an adventure sort of tale. And there's, the shark comes in and it's kind of a dangerous thing, but then they get the upper hand and the music gets kind of adventure-y, but then the shark kind of outsmarts them or does something unexpected, and then they lose the upper hand, and then they gain the upper hand again, and it's like a chess game between them and the shark. Like, it keeps going back and forth.
She's a smart one. She is.
3 barrels.
She got 3 barrels on her. She's not going under. Then she does, and all of a sudden, Quint's like, well, fuck me, I guess.
And Quint's, when it happened, like, Quint's death is my second favorite death. I love the poetry of it. I love the fact that he gets, like, swung around a bit and he's just all blah, and the blood is everywhere.
And he's panicking and he's kicking. He's like, you're not getting me. No, sir.
I think he has a great death, but number one death is Alex Kintner. Even to this day, just, you see that fin flip, you see the blood, and the yellow of the floating device that he has, and then you sort of see the kid bob up and go down, and there's just like this fabulous, absolutely fabulous death.
I always appreciate a movie that has the balls to go after sort of the untouchables, which is the children, especially if it's a movie like this.
Don't forget Pippet.
Pippet?
The dog.
The dog. It
They
touches
killed the
both
dog
of them.
too.
Both of them. Normally it's like, let's kill a bunch of teenagers and some adults, and then the one girl lives. No, here it's no convention is full out. It's no, kids die because kids are in the water. Dog dies because dog's in the water. Adults die because adults are in the water. Just don't go in the water. It is merciless like that. And that when you have something that follows the conventions where these guys are untouchable because it might upset people, well, first off, bad things happen. Second off, it ruins the mystery. It ruins a lot of suspense. Because you'll see a show where it's like, all right, now we've just got this kid who's going to be here the entire time because you know nothing's going to happen to them. And that's your PG disaster movies, like 99% of the time.
I think when you said bad things happen, that kind of hits the nail on the head, because the Kintner kid, I mean, you knew that somebody was probably going to die in that scene, and there were a bunch of kids in the water. But
honestly, I thought it was going to be the fat lady in the inner tube, because I remember so many parodies and so many insinuations about that in my pop culture endeavors, I guess.
But I think because of the way it happens, where it's sort of quick and they don't really focus on it a lot, it's, again, part of that things going on in the foreground and the background, like always something going on in the frame.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the frame where the kid dies. There's like 20 people in the shot.
And they deal with it. Like, there's that wonderful, wonderful scene where Mrs. Kintner comes and slaps Brody really hard. I don't think that was acting. And even the mayor tries to say, like, Brody, it's not your fault. And he's like, yeah,
it is.
It is.
Because I listened to you.
And
fuck you.
I mean, it's a brilliant character moment. They address the kid dying. It's just...
It was very touching. It was well acted. Well done.
2 words. Perfect movie. So on that note, unless you have anything else to add?
At this moment, not so much.
I'm just going to... Perfect movie. I can't say that enough.
Therefore, obviously, Mike votes for it is not going to stand the test of time.
I think 56 is too low for this movie. And I think it needs to be moved a little bit away from Cello.
See, that's going to be great. I'm going to have to remember that it's tied with Jaws, and I'm going to point that out to Mike, and he's going to be furious. He's going to be as mad as he was when we did The Sixth Sense. That'll be great.
The hair on the back of my neck still stands up every time we mention that.
It's your sixth sense for bad movies, I guess.
Perhaps.
For overrated movies. Obviously, Mike thinks it's a classic, and this time...
It's building suspense. By me going first, people are waiting. Everyone knows I'm saying perfect movie.
And now you're delaying it even longer. We'll see how much of this gets cut once more. I would actually agree with him entirely. This is a movie that will stand the test. It has that intensity. It is not topical. This is a movie that will live and survive well beyond its years, despite the sequels that happen. As long as people can separate those two things. I hear such bad things about them.
I think a testament to this film is that I have actually had the pleasure of showing it to a number of people who have never seen it before. I had a 30th anniversary Jaws party, and I believe there was three or four people there who hadn't seen it of various ages, and whether they were 12 or whether they were 30, like, everybody walked away going, that was a really, really good movie. And most of them who hadn't seen it, they had either avoided it because it was one of those big movies and it was like, oh, it couldn't possibly be good because everybody loves it, or they just thought shark movie means stupid, or...
Much like myself. Like, oh, shark killing people. Whatever. I've seen Sharknado and Sharktopus, and I started remembering those movies. I should not have done that. Sharktopus wasn't. It was a good kind of bad. I'll give it that.
So the fact that 30 years in, I had 3 or 4 people who were just kind of like, that was amazing. Now we're 40 years in, and I'm seeing it with you for the first time, or you're seeing it for the first time with me. I guess that's probably more accurate. And you're saying, yes,
it is a great movie.
Great movie. I mean, what else do you need to say about it?
If you haven't seen Jaws because you think that it's going to be schlocky, don't. It is not what you expect. That is what I will say. That is what there is to be said about it.
All right, so that's it for our episode on Jaws. So that's 2 yay votes for Jaws as a masterpiece, not a museum piece. Yay!
Yay!
And with that, it brings this episode For Your Consideration to a close. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to check us out on Facebook. Leave some comments. We're on Twitter at FYC Show.
We're everywhere. Look us up.
Everywhere and nowhere.
I'm Dustin Friesenhead.
And I'm Mike Josick.
Take care.
Ta-ta.
Here lies the body of Mary Lee, died at the age of 103. For 15 years she kept her virginity. Not a bad record for this vicinity.